The moment the glass shattered, every officer on Pine Ridge Drive froze. Sergeant Nathan Whitaker's shove had sent the tall black man crashing through his own front window. Blood streaked across the man's forehead, but his voice didn't tremble. "You just assaulted a federal judge." The words hit like thunder. Nate's jaw locked. His partner, Officer Jamal Carter, stopped mid-step, his hand still hovering near his radio. The young officer knew exactly who stood before them. Justice Elijah Grant of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. A man who had ruled on civil rights cases that shaped the South. A man who wasn't supposed to be here, in Willow Creek. A place where black families were quietly priced out and politely kept out. Nate felt every pair of watching eyes from the neat porches around him. Neighbors standing frozen behind manicured hedges. His hand, still on his gun, began to shake. He'd crossed a line that couldn't be undone. Before entering the story you are watching, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Give this story a like, and tell us where you're watching from. Your support helps stories like this reach more people who still believe justice matters. It began that morning with sunlight and silence. Elijah Grant, 59, had just moved into his new home at 127 Pine Ridge Drive, a quiet cul-de-sac lined with tall pines and perfect lawns. He wore a jade green shirt, the same color his late wife once called hopeful. He bent beside a young red oak sapling, the symbol he chose to mark a new chapter after 3 years of grief. He whispered, "Grow strong, little one," and poured water at its roots. A few doors down, Dr. Evelyn Hargrove, the HOA president and self-appointed guardian of tradition, walked her white poodle and stopped when she saw him. Her tone was polite but cold. "We have a vetting process for new residents." Elijah smiled. "I bought the house. Cash." She smiled thinly, turned away, and typed a quick message to Police Chief Harlan Reed. "Verify background. Property values at risk." An hour later, Sergeant Nathan Whitaker cruised past in his patrol SUV. He'd seen the message flash on the chief's group thread. New resident on Pine Ridge. Unknown male. He slowed when he saw Elijah near the porch, adjusting the small red oak stake. Nate stepped out, hand resting on his holster, posture heavy with authority. "Morning, sir." "You live here?" Elijah answered calmly. "Yes, I do." Nate's gaze hardened. "Let me see some ID." Elijah kept his composure. "Under Georgia law, I'm not required to show identification on my own property." Nate smirked. "My code says otherwise. Step away from the tree." His tone dripped with warning, the kind Elijah had heard too many times in his courtroom, fear disguised as control. Jamal Carter pulled up moments later, responding to Nate's call for backup. He saw the scene and his stomach tightened. He recognized Elijah immediately, from a Morehouse seminar 3 years earlier, where the judge had spoken about patience as a form of power. Jamal wanted to say something, to stop what was coming, but silence was his daily uniform in this department. One wrong word could end his career. Nate took a step closer, his boots sinking slightly in the grass. "Don't make this harder," he said. Elijah stood still, eyes locked on him. "You're out of line." "Sergeant." Nate's jaw twitched in a single motion. He shoved Elijah backward, hard. The sound of glass breaking sliced through the quiet neighborhood. Blood ran down Elijah's temple, bright against the pale trim of the window frame. He didn't yell. He didn't even touch the wound. He looked straight into Nate's eyes and said, evenly, "You've just assaulted a federal judge." Jamal's heart nearly stopped. Nate's expression shifted from anger to panic. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Lila Brooks, a wedding videographer working next door at 129 Pine Ridge, had her camera rolling. She'd been filming the bride's arrival when the argument caught her attention. Through her lens, she captured everything: the demand for ID, the shove, the fall, the blood. The sound of Elijah's calm voice echoing over the quiet cul-de-sac. She didn't realize it yet. But those 4.5 minutes would soon unravel an entire town. When Chief Reed's SUV pulled up minutes later, the mood shifted from outrage to orchestration. Reed glanced at the shattered glass, then at Elijah, who sat on the curb in handcuffs. "Judge or not, you're trespassing until verified," he muttered. He turned to Nate. "Keep it tight. No cameras." Jamal wanted to protest, to say there was video evidence, but fear weighed heavier than conscience. He watched as Nate placed Elijah in the back of the cruiser, every movement mechanical, rehearsed. "Clean this up," Nate ordered him as the door slammed shut. Lila's hands trembled. She stopped recording, heart racing, and slipped out quietly. She didn't even finish the wedding job. She drove straight home, locked the door, and replayed the footage on her laptop. The clarity stunned her. The sound of Elijah's calm voice, the crack of glass, the officer's smirk. She knew what it meant. Her ex-husband had been a cop too, fired for beating her. His favorite words still haunted her. "Cops are family. Outsiders pay." She hid the memory card in an old shoebox under her son's bed, praying no one would ever find it. At the Willow Creek Police Department, Elijah was led into a small gray interview room. His wrists were still cuffed. Chief Reed leaned against the wall, arms folded. "This can go away quietly. Judge, we both know how the system works." Elijah looked at him, voice steady. "You're right. I know exactly how it works." Reed nodded to Nate. "Book him for resisting." Then he walked out, leaving Nate to stare at the man he'd just assaulted. For the first time that day, Nate felt a flicker of doubt, an old whisper of his father's voice, telling him to protect the creek, to keep it clean. Clean meant white. Clean meant quiet. He had believed it all his life. Outside. Jamal stood by the patrol cars, trying to steady his breath. He knew what would happen next. The footage would vanish, reports rewritten, and Elijah Grant's name buried under pending verification. But this time felt different. Maybe it was the judge's unflinching eyes, or maybe it was his own reflection in that broken glass. He glanced at the red oak sapling lying sideways on the lawn, its roots exposed, soil drying in the sun. Something about it mirrored the truth he'd been denying for years. You can't grow where you're not allowed to stand. As the sun dipped behind the pines, the scene on Pine Ridge looked almost peaceful again. Neighbors swept their porches, pretending they hadn't seen a man bleed for daring to live among them. The air smelled of pine and glass dust. In the back of the cruiser, Elijah sat upright, blood dried at his temple. "Eyes forward," he whispered to himself, not in anger but in quiet certainty. Justice is patient. That night, the story of Willow Creek had already begun to turn, not in headlines yet, not on screens, but in the quiet courage of one man who refused to bow, one young officer who couldn't look away, and one woman who pressed record when everyone else stayed silent. The town didn't know it, but the roots of something unstoppable had already broken through the soil. The oak would rise again, stronger, deeper, and ready to expose what hid beneath the surface. Glass glittered across the lawn like spilled stars. Lila Brooks couldn't stop replaying the footage. 4 minutes and 32 seconds that could burn down a town. Each time she hit play, her hands shook harder. She'd seen violence before, but not like this. Not so casual. Not so quiet, her ex-husband used to say. Cops protect their own. Those words now sounded less like a warning and more like prophecy. She pulled the memory card from the camera, slid it into a plastic bag, and hid it inside a shoebox under her son's bed. Her pulse still hadn't slowed when she heard the faint rumble of a patrol SUV passing outside. For the first time in years, she locked every window at the Willow Creek Police Department. The air was colder than the walls. Elijah sat in a steel chair, wrists still cuffed to the table. Blood had dried along his hairline, forming a thin red line that looked like judgment itself. Chief Harlan Reed entered, his voice calm but sharp. "Judge Grant, this is a misunderstanding. Sergeant Whitaker believed you were trespassing." Elijah's reply was deliberate, each word heavy with certainty. "Your sergeant assaulted a federal judge on private property. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a crime." Reed's smile didn't move his eyes. "Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be." In the hallway, Nate Whitaker stood alone, hands trembling as he scrubbed at an invisible stain on his uniform. He'd crossed the line before, but never with someone powerful. He thought of his father, former Chief Tom Whitaker, who'd lost everything after being caught taking bribes from a local developer. The name Whitaker had never recovered. Nate had sworn to rebuild it, to prove the family still mattered. Now, one shove had destroyed the only thing he was trying to protect. His phone buzzed. A message from his daughter. "Sophie, you okay?" "Dad." He couldn't bring himself to answer. Meanwhile, Officer Jamal Carter lingered near the records room, trying not to draw attention. He'd just been ordered to erase the dash cam footage. Reed had said it casually, as if deleting evidence was routine maintenance. "It's been broken for a week, Chief." Jamal lied. Reed's tone darkened. "Then fix it before morning." Jamal nodded but stayed frozen long after Reed left. He knew this was his chance, maybe his only one, to do something right. In another corner of town, Evelyn Hargrove poured herself a glass of Chardonnay and called Reed from her balcony. "Harlan, I don't care who that man is. If word gets out that a federal judge was attacked here, property values drop 15%. You understand what that means for all of us," Reed assured her. "We're handling it, quietly." She ended the call, staring across her manicured garden where an iron sign read, "Heritage lives here." For her, it did. For others, it was a wall, back in the holding room. Elijah watched the clock tick past midnight. He knew silence was their strategy. Delay, exhaust, confuse. He'd seen it in cases across the South. What they didn't know was that someone was already breaking their silence. Jamal slipped into the restroom, checked the stalls, then crouched to slide a small burner phone under the door to Elijah's feet. One call. He whispered, "Don't say my name." Elijah nodded once. When the door closed again, he pressed the number he'd memorized years ago. "David Langford, Chief Judge of the 11th Circuit." The line clicked. "David." "It's Elijah. Willow Creek Police Department. Civil rights violation. Send the FBI." There was a pause, then a quiet reply. "Hang tight. Help's on the way." Nate watched from across the hall as Elijah was led back to the holding cell. The judge's calm expression unnerved him. There was no fear, no anger, just patience, the kind that sees through lies. For the first time, Nate saw himself reflected not as a soldier or protector, but as his father's son. Following the same poisoned footsteps, he felt the weight of every complaint dismissed, every name erased from the system. He told himself he'd done what was right for the community, but what kind of community needed to be protected from a man watering a tree? At dawn, Lila sat at her kitchen table, staring at the shoebox. She could hear her son's soft breathing in the next room. She thought about the time she'd called 911 years ago, after her husband hit her, and how the responding officer had laughed. "You must have said something to deserve it." That laughter never left her. Now she held a piece of truth the whole town would try to bury. She wanted to forget, to delete the video and pretend none of it happened. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the look on Elijah's face. Steady, unbroken. She whispered to herself, "If he didn't back down, neither will I." By sunrise, the red oak in Elijah's yard had wilted. Its roots were half exposed, the soil dry. Neighbors passed by, pretending not to notice the broken window or the dried streaks of blood near the porch. Elijah's house sat quiet, under the illusion that the storm had passed. But inside the Willow Creek Police Department, phones were ringing, emails were flying, and panic was spreading faster than the truth. When the first black SUV pulled up outside, Chief Reed's face lost its color. The agent stepped out, badge flashing in the morning light. Special Agent Lisa Torres, FBI, released Judge Grant immediately. Reed tried to stall, muttering about procedures, but her tone cut through. Now, Chief, within minutes, Elijah was freed. He walked past Nate without a word, but his eyes lingered for a moment. Calm, piercing, unforgettable. That silence would haunt Nate far longer than any sentence could. As Elijah stepped outside, sunlight touched the broken glass that still clung to the window frame. It shimmered faintly, like pieces of a truth that could no longer be hidden. The air felt heavy, as if the whole town was holding its breath, behind the tinted windows of the FBI vehicle. Elijah whispered, "Justice takes time, but it always finds its way home, and somewhere deep in the soil, beneath the weight of silence and shame." The roots of that fallen oak began to stir again. By the time the sun climbed over the pines, the story had already started to leak beyond Willow Creek's borders. A quiet phone call had set the storm in motion. When Elijah Grant told Chief Judge David Langford, "Willow Creek Police Department, civil rights violation, send the FBI." It was not a plea. It was an order grounded in law. Within 3 hours, Special Agent Lisa Torres from the Atlanta field office was on the road, her siren off, her mind racing. Few things stirred the Bureau faster than the assault of a sitting federal judge. Inside the Willow Creek Police Department, the walls felt smaller. Chief Reed was in his office, tie loosened, whispering into his phone. "We're handling it internally." His voice cracked with the weight of control slipping away. In the hallway, Nate Whitaker sat on a bench, elbows on his knees, staring at the scuffed floor. Every sound felt louder than it should. The hum of the vending machine, the soft ring of the dispatcher's phone, the murmur of gossip spreading through the ranks. When Jamal Carter walked past, Nate's eyes followed him with suspicion. He could sense betrayal, but not yet prove it. Moments later, the front door swung open. Agent Torres flashed her credentials. "Release Judge Grant, immediately!" Reed tried to buy time, but her tone was firm. "You're sitting on a civil rights violation involving a federal officer of the court. Do you really want to gamble with obstruction?" Reed hesitated, then motioned to a deputy. "Uncuff him." Elijah stepped out of the holding cell after nearly 11 hours in custody. His head was wrapped in a thin bandage, his shirt stained, but his voice carried quiet strength. "I trust you'll be hearing from the Department of Justice," he said. Reed forced a smile, the kind that hides fear behind authority. "Just a misunderstanding. Judge," Elijah met his eyes. "Justice doesn't misunderstand violence." As Elijah walked out into the daylight, Jamal exhaled for the first time in hours, but his relief was short-lived. Nate cornered him in the locker room, door slamming shut behind them. The space smelled of sweat and metal polish. "You think I don't know?" Nate growled. That burner phone didn't walk into his hands. Jamal tried to back away, but Nate lunged. His fist caught Jamal in the stomach once, then again in the ribs. The young officer doubled over. Gasping, Nate hissed, "You think you're different because you wear the badge? You'll never be one of us." He kicked Jamal once more and stormed out. Unbeknownst to him, Rosa Martinez, the department's cleaning lady, had been mopping the hallway outside. She'd seen it all through the glass slats in the door. She didn't speak English well, but she knew injustice when she saw it. Quietly, she pulled out her phone, recorded 30 seconds of the assault, and sent it to her son in Atlanta with a simple caption, "El Policía Malo," her son. a college student studying journalism, forwarded it to an activist contact within minutes. By the next morning, the video would be everywhere. Meanwhile, across town, Lila Brooks sat in front of her computer, staring at the same video she'd recorded the day before. The guilt twisted inside her. Every instinct screamed to stay quiet. But when she saw Elijah's calm defiance, the way he stood despite the blood on his temple, she knew silence would make her part of the crime. She opened her email, attached the file, logo removed, and typed a single line. Willow Creek isn't what it seems. Use this. She sent it to Ava Chen, an investigative reporter for the Atlanta Ledger. Ava's reputation was built on uncovering what others buried. Lila hit send, then turned off her phone and cried for the first time in years. That night, Elijah returned home. The window had been boarded up, and the red oak lay on its side, roots exposed. He stood over it, the scent of dried sap mixing with dust. He didn't curse or mourn. He simply whispered, "You'll stand again." Then he stepped inside and turned his study into a war room. He pulled out legal pads, sticky notes, case files, and a laptop filled with decades of rulings. He wrote one sentence on the top of a blank page. "We don't sue, we expose." Minutes later, his phone vibrated. "Mace Delgado," the voice said. Elijah almost smiled. "I was hoping you'd answer." Mace was a former federal prosecutor, once brilliant, now branded as difficult after refusing to indict a black teenager under political pressure. Elijah had mentored him years ago. "I owe the system one." Mace said, "Send me what you have." At the same time, Jamal sat in his car outside the station, bruised and silent. He had a choice: keep pretending or fight back. He pulled a USB drive from his pocket, plugged it into his dashboard laptop, and began copying files. 41 unwarranted traffic stops, 38 involving black or Latino drivers. Each report bore the same approving signature, Chief Harlan Reed. He hid the drive in his boot, knowing that discovery meant the end of his career, or worse, at midnight. Ava Chen's email pinged. The anonymous clip from Lila played across her screen. The timestamp, the audio, the visible police insignia. It was undeniable, she muttered. This town just buried itself. She called her editor. "I need 2 weeks. Quiet investigation. Trust me. By dawn." 5 people who had never spoken before were now bound by one act of truth. A judge who refused to bow. A young officer who risked everything. A woman who chose courage over fear. A reporter who wouldn't look away. And a disgraced prosecutor seeking redemption. None of them knew how deep Willow Creek's rot ran. They only knew this was no longer about one window or one shove. It was about a system built to silence, and the few who had decided to break that silence for good. As the sun rose again, Elijah stood by his fallen tree, his hands resting on the dirt. "You'll grow stronger from this," he said quietly. Somewhere inside the soil, the roots still clung to life, waiting for the day they'd rise again. Just like him, patient, steady, and unbroken. Evening shadows stretched long across Pine Ridge Drive as Elijah Grant's home transformed into something between a command post and a sanctuary. The window was still boarded, the faint scent of pine lingering in the air. The once quiet study now held the hum of purpose. Laptops open, documents spread across the table, and faces gathered in cautious unity. Ava Chen arrived first, a recorder tucked discreetly into her blazer. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, absorbing every detail. "The video's clean," she said. "No tampering, no edits. It'll hold in court and on air." Elijah nodded, his tone calm but firm. "We won't rush this. Truth isn't a weapon. It's a mirror. Let them see themselves clearly before we strike." Lila Brooks sat at the edge of the sofa, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned pale. "If they find out it was me," she whispered. They'll come for my son. Elijah met her eyes. You've already done the hardest thing, telling the truth. Now it's our job to protect it. He turned toward a man standing quietly near the bookshelf, Mace Delgado. His hair was streaked with gray, his suit slightly worn, but his eyes carried the precision of a man who'd once dissected federal cases for a living. He dropped a stack of folders on the table. Willow Creek Holdings, LLC, he said. A front company for the HOA and the police department. Chief Reed owns 18%. Evelyn Hargrove owns 22%. And Nate Whitaker? He gets a monthly consulting payment, $3,500, coded as neighborhood safety. Ava raised a brow. That's not neighborhood safety. That's hush money. Mace nodded. Every complaint against Whitaker, 7 in total, was dismissed by Internal Affairs, all signed off by Reed. He pointed to another document. There's more. In 2023, the HOA signed a contract paying the department $75,000 a year for enhanced security services. It's coded as patrol overtime, but it's really racial gatekeeping, keeping black renters and buyers out. The silence that followed was heavy, almost reverent. Lila leaned back, eyes wide. You mean they've been paying the police to discriminate? Yes, Mace replied. And that's RICO territory if we prove conspiracy and profit motive? Elijah glanced at the red oak outside through the boarded window. We will prove it. His tone was soft, but carried steel beneath it. Jamal Carter arrived next, limping slightly, the bruises on his ribs hidden under his uniform. He placed a small flash drive on the table. Traffic stop data. 41 incidents in 6 months, all unreported or misfiled. 38 involved minorities. Ava took the drive carefully, her journalist instincts alert. This is enough to bury a career, she said. Or save one, Jamal replied, his eyes meeting Elijah's. For the first time that day, Elijah smiled faintly. Courage is contagious. Officer Carter, you're proof of that. The group worked late into the night, piecing together patterns of corruption that stretched beyond the small town's limits. Every document revealed a deeper truth. The illusion of safety had been bought with fear. Reed's emails to Hargrove showed explicit bias. Phrases like, protect our heritage and no more Section 8 eyesores. Ava scrolled through one message and read aloud. We keep the creek white and wealthy. Signed, Chief Reed. The words hung in the air like poison. Mace broke the silence. That's intent. Combined with Lila's footage and Nate's assault, this isn't just civil rights. It's organized conspiracy under color of law. The plan began to form slowly, carefully. They would collect every strand of proof, every confession, every transaction, then strike all at once, with the FBI, the press, and the courts aligned. No leaks, no half measures, Elijah said. We wait until the evidence speaks louder than we can. Ava smirked slightly. Judge, that sounds like my kind of trial. To bait the conspirators, they needed one last piece. Confirmation that Reed and Hargrove were still trying to bury the story. Lila volunteered, voice trembling but steady. I'll tell them I changed my mind, that I deleted the footage. Mace turned toward her sharply. You realize they'll test you. They might threaten you. They already have, she said quietly. But I'm done living scared. Mace nodded slowly, respect softening his tone. Then we'll make sure they incriminate themselves. I'll plant hidden cameras and mics in your house, inside the ceramic vase on your mantel. They won't know they're confessing on tape. He opened a small case lined with discreet black devices. Once they talk, we have them. Elijah handed Lila a small silver watch. This records audio for 12 hours. Press the dial once to start, once to stop. Simple. Lila slipped it on, staring at it as though it were armor. What if they don't take the bait? She asked. They will, Elijah said quietly. People who build their power on fear can't resist reminding others who's in charge. Before they left, Elijah received a letter slid under his door. The envelope bore the HOA seal. He opened it, scanning the words aloud. Welcome to Willow Creek. Attendance at the next HOA meeting is mandatory for all new residents. He looked up at the group. They're circling the wagons. As the night deepened, the house fell quiet. Lila drove home with her headlights off until she reached her driveway. Ava returned to Atlanta to prepare her story skeleton. Mace stayed behind, installing surveillance in Lila's home the next morning. Jamal returned to his precinct, pretending nothing had changed. But within each of them, something had shifted. A quiet conviction that justice was finally turning its gaze toward Willow Creek. Elijah lingered by the red oak before bed. He pressed a hand to its cracked trunk, feeling the rough bark against his palm. "You're hurt," he whispered, "but not dead." The moonlight glinted off the tree's tender new shoots, fragile but alive, for the first time in days. Elijah allowed himself a small breath of peace. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, only that it was coming, and he would meet it head-on. The war for truth had begun, not with sirens or shouts, but with whispers shared in a boarded-up house under the watchful eye of a wounded oak. The evening air carried the faint hum of cicadas as Lila Brooks stood by her living room window, staring at the streetlights flickering outside. Her palms were damp. The small silver watch Elijah had given her glinted under the lamp. Inside it, a hidden recorder waited. Mace Delgado's hidden cameras were already running, tucked into a ceramic vase, a picture frame, and one behind the couch vent. The plan was simple. Lure Nate Whitaker and Evelyn Hargrove into her home under the pretense that she wanted to make things right. She had rehearsed her lines a dozen times. "I don't want trouble. I just want to keep my son safe." But when the sound of tires crunched over gravel outside, her mind went blank. The knock was sharp, practiced. Nate stood on her porch wearing a navy polo and jeans, casual enough to look harmless, but his presence filled the doorway like a storm. "Evening. Lila," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mind if I come in?" She hesitated, then opened the door. Just for a minute, he stepped inside, glancing around. His gaze lingered on the ceramic vase for a heartbeat too long, but he didn't seem to notice anything unusual. "You've had a rough few days," he said softly. "People talking, rumors spreading. That video of yours, you should have told me sooner." Lila forced a trembling laugh. "I don't want any trouble." "Sergeant, he cut her off. "Good. Because trouble's what you'll get if that footage sees daylight. Delete it, and this all goes away." His tone was almost gentle, like a man coaxing a frightened child. Lila swallowed hard. "I already deleted it." She lied. "I don't want to lose my house or my son's safety." Nate smiled thinly. "Smart woman. But just so we understand each other. Accidents happen. You know, school buses take wrong turns. Tires blow out. Best not to invite that kind of tragedy." For a moment, the words hung in the air like poison. Lila's stomach turned. She could barely hold her voice steady. "You don't have to threaten me." Nate leaned closer. "I'm not threatening. I'm advising." He took a step back, glancing at his phone. "Now, about that HOA thing. Evelyn's going to call you. She handles the formalities." Minutes later, the phone rang. Lila put it on speaker, pretending to fumble with the volume. "Mrs. Brooks." Came Evelyn Hargrove's smooth, practiced voice. "We understand you've caused quite a stir. We can't have that in Willow Creek. Your HOA fees could increase by 300% for non-compliance." Lila's voice cracked. "I said I deleted it." "Good," Evelyn replied. "Because we protect our community." We have to preserve what's left of its heritage. The call ended. Lila's hands were shaking. Nate gave her one last look. "Keep it that way," he said, tapping her shoulder before walking out. The moment the door shut, she collapsed onto the floor, sobbing silently. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every word, every threat. She pressed the side of her watch to stop the recording, her tears wetting the dial. An hour later, Jamal Carter arrived under the cover of darkness. He slipped through the back door, checking every corner before speaking. "You did good," he said gently. They took the bait. He handed her a flash drive. "Reads emails. You should see this. Together." They opened the laptop. The screen lit the room with a pale glow as Lila read the words aloud. "Keep the creek white and wealthy. No more Section 8 rentals. HOA fund transfers approved." Her mouth fell open. "He really wrote this? He sent it to Hargrove." Jamal said. She forwarded it to Nate. They both froze at the sound of footsteps outside. Jamal peeked through the curtain. Nothing but shadows. "I'll get this to Mace," he whispered. "Keep your doors locked. No one comes in." He slipped out, disappearing into the night, back at Elijah's home. The team gathered again. Lila's footage was uploaded, encrypted, and copied 3 times. Mace watched the playback, his expression grim. That's a confession. No question. Threats, racial motive, extortion, coercion, all on tape. Ava Chen typed rapidly on her laptop. With the HOA emails. That's conspiracy under federal law, civil rights plus RICO. Elijah stood near the boarded window, the oak faintly visible outside in the moonlight. "Then we move," he said. "Tomorrow. Ava publishes. Mace, send the package to the FBI. Jamal, go dark until this breaks." Mace nodded. Already preparing the transmission. He'd routed it through 3 secure channels, ending with the Atlanta field office. He typed the message carefully. Civil rights violations and racketeering. Attached, recordings, contracts, correspondence, verified video. Immediate action advised. He paused before hitting send, his mind flashing back to the moment his career had ended, refusing to indict a black teen for a crime he didn't commit. This time, he thought, justice wouldn't be denied. He pressed send. Meanwhile, Nate sat alone in his car outside the police station. His hands trembled as he scrolled through his phone. A new text flashed from his daughter. "Sophie. Dad, is it true? The video?" His chest tightened. He stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it without replying. He told himself it was to protect her, but the truth was simpler. He didn't know how to explain who he'd become. Back inside the station, Chief Reed was already in damage control mode, shredding old files and calling contacts at City Hall. "We'll contain it," he muttered. "We always do." But that night, containment was impossible. Lila's voice echoed through digital channels, carried by journalists, lawyers, and unseen allies. The truth was moving faster than the lies. At 2:43 a.m., the FBI inbox pinged with Mace's message. Agent Lisa Torres opened the file, watched the footage in stunned silence, and whispered, "God help them." Orders were issued before sunrise, simultaneous warrants, federal coordination. Willow Creek was about to wake up to a new kind of dawn, one where silence could no longer save the powerful. In the quiet before that storm, Elijah stood on his porch beside the red oak, its broken roots now reburied in fresh soil. "It's time," he said softly, and in the still Georgia night. For the first time since the window shattered, the air smelled not of fear, but of change. The morning broke quietly over Willow Creek, but beneath that calm, justice was already on the move. At 6:14 a.m., The first FBI convoy turned off the main highway, headlights cutting through the mist that lingered above the pine trees. In homes across the neighborhood, coffee brewed, sprinklers clicked, and the world seemed normal. For one last moment, then, with a unified rhythm, black SUVs fanned out across the cul-de-sac. Doors flew open. Agents and windbreakers moved with purpose. What began as a whisper the night before had now become a storm. The Atlanta Ledger released its headline minutes earlier. Federal judge assaulted in Willow Creek. HOA and police collusion exposed. The article contained everything. Lila's footage, Nate's threat, Evelyn Hargrove's call, Reed's racist emails, and financial records from Willow Creek Holdings. Within an hour, it went viral. National outlets picked it up, social media exploded, and by sunrise, Willow Creek's carefully built facade of perfection was cracking wide open inside the police station. Chief Harlan Reed was shredding documents like a man racing against time. His hands shook as each page disappeared into the machine. He muttered to himself, "Contain it. Just contain it." But the noise of the shredder was drowned out by the sound of engines outside. FBI agents poured through the doors. Federal Bureau of Investigation. "Don't move." Reed turned, the last page still in his hand. "You can't just barge in here," he stammered. Agent Lisa Torres held up the warrant. "We can. Chief, racketeering, civil rights violations, destruction of evidence. You know the list." Reed's face drained of color as they cuffed him on the spot. Across town, in her rose garden, Evelyn Hargrove was sipping her morning tea when she heard the sirens. She looked up just in time to see two unmarked cars pulling up the drive. "Excuse me?" she called out sharply. "This is private property." The agents ignored her. Stepping onto the porch, "Dr. Evelyn Hargrove, you are under arrest for conspiracy and obstruction of justice." She froze, tea trembling in her hand. "This is outrageous." "Do you know who I am?" the lead agent replied calmly. "Yes, ma'am, and that's exactly why we're here," as they led her away. Her neighbors peeked from behind their blinds, phones recording the scene she'd once been sure would never touch her. At the same time, Nate Whitaker was asleep on his couch when the knock came, hard, deliberate. He stumbled to the door in his t-shirt, blinking against the morning light. "Sergeant Whitaker?" an agent said. Nate nodded. "You're under arrest." The words didn't land immediately. When they did, he stepped back, dazed. For what? Assault, obstruction, and conspiracy under color of law. He tried to speak, but his voice failed. The agent read him his rights as his daughter's framed photo looked on from the mantel, a silent witness to the fall. Meanwhile, the courthouse in downtown Atlanta erupted with press. The Ledger's offices were flooded with calls. Ava Chen sat at her desk, her phone buzzing non-stop. Her story now cited by every major outlet in the country. Her editor leaned over and whispered, "You just cracked the biggest civil rights case in Georgia since '68. She didn't smile. "This isn't victory," she said quietly. "This is exposure. The real work starts now." Jamal Carter watched the news from his small apartment, still nursing bruised ribs. His phone buzzed with messages from fellow officers, some hostile, others silent acknowledgments of respect. He didn't answer any of them. Instead, he opened the front door and stepped outside, breathing the free air of a man who had finally done what was right. At Elijah's house. The group gathered once more. Lila sat beside him, her hands trembling as the television showed Hargrove in handcuffs. "I can't believe it," she whispered. Elijah placed a steady hand on hers. "Believe it. You made them answer." Mace stood by the window, reading a breaking alert from his phone. "Reed's assets frozen, federal charges filed. We did it." But his tone carried more weight than triumph. He'd seen justice before. It was never clean. Then came the news no one expected. A report flashed on screen. Local teen Malik Johnson found dead in dorm room. Suicide note mentions Willow Creek shooting. Elijah's breath caught. Malik had been a 19-year-old student, shot in the leg 2 years earlier by Nate for running while black. His case had been dismissed, labeled non-lethal force. The note read, "I tried to tell them. Maybe now they'll listen." The room fell silent. Lila's eyes filled with tears. Jamal clenched his jaw, whispering. He was just a kid. Elijah stood, the pain in his chest heavy but his resolve firm. "This isn't over," he said. "The system feeds on silence, and we're not going quiet." He walked outside, the others following him. The red oak stood upright again, its roots reburied, leaves trembling in the wind. He looked at it for a long moment, then said softly, "We lost one more life before they listened. Let's make sure he's the last." By late afternoon, footage of the raids had reached every corner of the country. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse in Atlanta, holding signs that read, "Justice for Willow Creek and no more quiet crimes." For once, the faces in those crowds looked like the America Elijah believed in, diverse, determined, awake, that night, under the same sky that had once hidden so much corruption. The lights of Willow Creek glowed differently. Patrol cars sat empty. The police station sealed with yellow tape. The HOA offices were dark. The old order had fallen. Inside his home, Elijah sat alone in the quiet. The hum of the night filled the space where fear once lived. He looked at the oak through his window, its silhouette strong, unyielding, and whispered, "This is just the beginning." And in that stillness, beneath the weight of all that had broken, a new kind of peace took root. The federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta stood like a monument to truth, cold, solemn, and unyielding. By the time the trial began, the entire nation was watching. Reporters filled the steps, microphones lined the entryway, and protesters gathered beyond the barricades holding signs that read, "No one is above the law," and "Justice for Judge Grant." Inside courtroom 3A, the air was thick with tension. Judge Maya Patel presided, her gavel resting on the bench like a weapon of order. She was known for her sharpness and fairness, the kind of judge who could cut through lies with a single look. When the bailiff called, United States versus Nathan Whitaker, Evelyn Hargrove, and Harlan Reed. No one moved. Cameras were banned, but the silence carried more weight than 1,000 flashes ever could. Elijah Grant sat in the gallery, wearing a dark suit and a bandage no longer needed but left as a reminder. He wasn't there for vengeance. He was there to witness. On the other side of the room sat the defendants, Nate Whitaker in a plain gray suit, eyes downcast, Evelyn Hargrove in pearls and a trembling composure, and Chief Reed with his jaw clenched, still pretending to be in control. The once proud faces of Willow Creek's guardians now looked hollow under the fluorescent light. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Kim opened for the prosecution. She began without flourish. "This case is about power abused and silence weaponized," she said. "A federal judge was assaulted in his own yard for living in the wrong neighborhood. A police department conspired with a homeowners association to enforce segregation through fear, threats, and deceit, and when exposed, they chose to cover up rather than come clean." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The evidence would do the shouting for her, first. The jury saw Lila Brooks's video. The screen showed Elijah being shoved through his own window, blood dripping from his forehead, and the cold defiance in his voice as he said, "You just assaulted a federal judge." The jurors leaned forward, their expressions tightening. Next came the audio from Lila's home, Nate's soft, menacing tone. "Accidents happen. School buses take wrong turns." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. When Evelyn's phone call played, "We must preserve our heritage." One juror shook her head in disbelief. Then came the emails. Reed's words displayed in black and white. Keep the creek white and wealthy. No more Section 8 renters. His lawyer objected, claiming the line was taken out of context. Judge Patel's reply was sharp. The context is clear enough. Counselor, the objection was overruled when it was Mace Delgado's turn to testify. He walked to the stand with the poise of a man who had seen justice bend but never break. He laid out the financial trail, explaining how HOA funds were funneled through fake consulting accounts to pay officers for harassment operations. Every dollar, he said, was a message, one that told black families they weren't welcome. Ava Chen followed, detailing her investigation, verifying the chain of evidence, and confirming that every file matched what had been sent to the FBI. Her tone was calm but relentless. They thought they could hide behind paperwork, she said, but the truth leaves fingerprints. Jamal Carter's testimony was the hardest to hear. His ribs were still tender, but he stood straight in his uniform. When asked why he came forward, he said simply, "Because silence makes you guilty too." He described the night of the assault, the order to erase footage, and the beating Nate gave him afterward. At one point, his voice broke. "I joined the force to make a difference," he said, "but I didn't know I'd have to fight my own to do it." A few jurors wiped their eyes. When the defense took their turn, they clung to the word misunderstanding. Nate's attorney painted him as a good officer under pressure, saying he believed he was protecting the neighborhood. Hargrove's lawyer argued she didn't understand the implications of her words. Reed's attorney tried to blame subordinates, insisting he was misled by false reports. None of it landed. The evidence spoke louder than their excuses. Then came the moment everyone waited for, Nathan Whitaker's own testimony. He stood at the witness stand, his once proud frame slouched. "I was following orders," he began. "My father always told me, protect the creek, keep it safe." The prosecutor stepped forward. "Safe from whom?" "Sergeant?" Nate hesitated. "From outsiders? Outsiders like Judge Elijah Grant?" The silence stretched. Finally, he said, "I was wrong." His voice cracked, tears welling up. "I thought I was defending something good, but all I did was repeat my father's mistakes." Evelyn Hargrove took the stand next, insisting, "We were preserving property values. It wasn't racism. It was economics," the prosecutor asked quietly. "And whose economics? Dr. Hargrove? Because it seems only one color's homes were ever protected." Evelyn's eyes darted to the jury, then away. "You wouldn't understand," she whispered. "You're right." The prosecutor replied, "No one should." When closing arguments came, Sarah Kim's words echoed through the courtroom. "Justice," she said, "is not about punishing evil. It's about restoring what was taken: dignity, safety, truth. These defendants didn't just violate the law, they violated the promise of equality this country stands on." The defense offered little more than apologies. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, no one breathed. The foreman stood. "We find the defendants guilty on all counts." The room seemed to exhale. Nate Whitaker was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison, his pension forfeited, his law enforcement license revoked for life. Chief Harlan Reed received 5 years under RICO. Evelyn Hargrove was sentenced to 3 years and ordered to pay $1.2 million in restitution, her estate and assets liquidated. As the gavel fell, Nate turned once toward Elijah. "I was wrong," he said softly. Elijah met his eyes and replied, "Then learn from it." The sound of the gavel echoed through the hall like the closing of a chapter. But to Elijah, it wasn't an ending. It was the moment the ground finally stopped shaking, and the roots of something better began to take hold. 1 year later, Willow Creek no longer looked like the same town. The manicured perfection remained. The pine trees, the winding streets, the rows of homes with white trim. but something deeper had changed. Something that couldn't be polished or hidden behind gates anymore. The silence was gone. Conversations filled the sidewalks. Children of every color played on the same lawns once guarded by fear. And a new sign stood proudly at the entrance. "Welcome to Willow Creek, a community for all." Beneath it, a young red oak reached toward the sky, its roots firm, its leaves a radiant green. It had survived the storm, just like the man who planted it. Justice Elijah Grant stood in front of his home at 127 Pine Ridge Drive, the same place where blood had once marked the pavement. He wore his familiar jade green silk shirt, now pressed and spotless. The breeze brushed against his face as he whispered to the oak, "You grew, little one." It had been a full year since the trial, and those scars remained, on the glass, on the people, and on the town. He had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past, it was about transforming it. Elijah had been appointed Chief Judge of the 11th Circuit 2 months earlier, the culmination of a life devoted to fairness. His confirmation hearing had been televised nationwide. When asked what justice meant to him after what happened, he said, "Justice is not revenge. It's a mirror held up to power, showing it what it tried to hide." Those words had echoed across the country, inspiring legal reforms, new oversight programs, and countless conversations about accountability. But for Elijah, the most meaningful legacy was local. He had created the Elijah Grant Fund for Civil Rights and Police Accountability, a foundation supporting victims of police misconduct and funding community-led reform programs. Within its first year, 47 families received assistance, including scholarships, legal aid, and counseling. The fund's motto was simple: "Justice begins where silence ends," inside a modest office in downtown Atlanta. Jamal Carter adjusted the framed certificate on his wall. Sergeant Jamal Carter, Community Reform Division. He had been promoted 6 months after the trial, becoming the youngest sergeant in the department's history. His unit, once mocked as public relations cleanup, had evolved into the Community Reform Initiative, a new model of policing built on partnership, transparency, and empathy. Jamal led it with quiet determination, hiring officers who understood that a badge was not a shield from accountability, but a promise of service. When reporters asked how he found the courage to testify, he always gave the same answer: "Because Judge Grant didn't blink when I couldn't speak." Lila Brooks sat in her photography studio downtown, the sign above her door reading "Brooks and Light Photography." The name came from a line Elijah once told her: "Truth lives in the light." Her small business had flourished since the story broke. Families, couples, and even city officials came to her for portraits. She'd received the Georgia Citizen Courage Award for her bravery, though she rarely spoke about it. For her, the real reward was seeing her son sleep without fear, knowing she had helped make their world safer. On her studio wall hung a single framed still from the video she once feared to share. The moment Elijah stood bleeding yet unbroken. Beneath it, she had written in soft ink, "Courage is the quiet before change." Evelyn Hargrove, once the queen of Willow Creek, now lived alone in a one-room apartment in Decatur. Her mansion had been seized and sold, her accounts drained by restitution payments. She walked to the bus stop each morning, carrying a second-hand purse, and avoided mirrors. She had lost everything except time, and time was merciless. Sometimes, she'd see the news mention Willow Creek's new programs, and her face would twist in disbelief. It was supposed to be mine. She'd whisper, but it never was. It belonged to the people she had tried to keep out. Nathan Whitaker served his 7-year sentence at a medium-security federal prison in Alabama. The first year was brutal. He was attacked once, his ribs broken by an inmate who had once been a police officer too, but this one was black. "You earned that," the man said before walking away. Nate didn't fight back. He spent his days reading, writing, and reflecting. His daughter, Sophie, visited only once, her eyes distant. She had taken her mother's last name, quietly erasing his from her life. In a letter Elijah sent him months later, the judge wrote, "Justice is patient. Nathan, use your time well." Nate kept that letter folded in his Bible, reading it whenever the walls felt too close. Chief Harlan Reed was released after serving 4 years of his 5-year sentence, emerging a shadow of the man who once commanded fear. He tried to move to Florida, but no department would hire him. His name had become synonymous with corruption. He lived quietly, avoiding cameras, avoiding mirrors, avoiding truth. For Elijah, justice was never about their downfall. It was about rebuilding the soil they had poisoned. Willow Creek had become a pilot site for fair housing oversight and racial bias reform. Its police department now under community review. 3 class-action lawsuits had resulted in $4.8 million in settlements to victims of wrongful stops and intimidation, for the first time in its history. Willow Creek had elected a diverse HOA board, half black, half white, led by a Latina civil rights attorney named Rosa Martinez's son. That spring, the red oak reached 10 feet tall, its branches wide enough to cast shade across the yard, on the anniversary of his assault. Elijah invited everyone who had stood beside him, Lila, Jamal, Ava, and Mace. They gathered quietly under the oak. Mace raised a glass of sweet tea and said, "To the roots that held when everything else fell," Ava added softly, "and to the people who refused to stay silent." Elijah smiled, looking up at the leaves shifting gently in the Georgia breeze. "You all taught me something," he said. "Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it grows." As the evening sun dipped below the tree line, the camera of Lila's phone captured the moment. A black judge, a young officer, a once disgraced lawyer, a fearless reporter, and a woman who dared to tell the truth, all standing beneath an oak that refused to die. The image would later circulate online, captioned simply, "The Roots of Willow Creek." Elijah lingered after the others left, his hand resting on the oak's trunk. The bark was rough but alive, scarred yet strong. He whispered, "You grew. So did we." The wind rustled the branches like a gentle reply, and as dusk settled over the once divided town, Willow Creek stood reborn, not as a place of exclusion, but as proof that even in the darkest soil, justice can take root and rise again. Thank you so much for watching this story. If it moved you, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments.